In this video, we will be learning place. So place is another P that companies need to understand and master. Um, so place is another word that's used for place is basically distributions and channels. So the slide topic, video topic is global marketing channels and physical distribution. So we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of channel management and distribution management. So, unlike the other P's, which are typically more under the control of the company, place or channels and distribution is a little bit unique. It's challenging because, unlike the others, channels and distribution require a company to work in collaboration with other companies. So, I mean, think about it. If I'm a manufacturer and I need to get my products out into into the hands of the customers, unless you sell direct, you have to work with other, intermediaries, so to speak. And these intermediaries could be distributors. They could be, wholesalers. They could be retailers, and so forth. So that means that you have to be on the same page. You have to have very similar goals, and the intermediaries have to be supportive of your products, and they need to be motivated just as much as you are to represent, right? To represent your product at good faith, so that it lands in the hands of the customers. And when they're not on the same page, and when they have conflicting goals and objectives, then things can get messy, and then there's conflict. They don't get along very well, and they may represent and they may favor your competitors' products on the shelf as opposed to your products, and that could hurt your sales. So that's one of the reasons why channels and distributions place has these unique and idiosyncratic challenges that other P's necessarily do not possess. So, typically there's a contractual agreement that's binding and that's difficult to change. You can't just walk away from a contract. You may sign a contract that can last, for an extended period of time with these intermediaries. And if you don't like them, you just have to find a way to work around it and, make it work, because you can't walk out of a contract. You're going to have to pay a penalty. So there can be opportunistic behaviors, right? I mean, like I said, the intermediaries, the retailers, the wholesalers, the distributors, they may not represent you at good faith. They may be engaging in opportunistic behavior in the sense that they may be favoring and representing your competitors' products because the competition provided more provided more funds for for training. They provided more money so that their products are being more visible, on the shelves in grocery stores than your products. So, there are many situations where, there can be, instances where, the intermediaries may not be looking after you. Although you may believe that they're looking after you, it's very hard to monitor what they're doing on a daily basis. And therefore, these are some of the challenges, and hence trust and commitment between the two parties becomes very, very important. So, what are the objectives and what type of utility and the benefits do channels provide? Well, it can be summarized into 4 different types of utility: place, time, form, and information. So let's take a look at each of these utilities. So one of the most obvious ones is obviously place, right? I mean, one of the key values that intermediaries, retailers provide is it makes the products accessible, right? It makes it available. I mean, imagine if I'm a customer and I had to go to the P&G headquarters in Cincinnati to buy Crest or Tide. How inconvenient and ridiculous would that be? So we go to a grocery store, we go to Costco, we go to convenience stores, we go wherever we need to go to buy whatever we need. So products become, accessible and they become available. It's a matter of convenience. And then the second one is time, right? So they make things available, when we want to buy them, right? So some stores are open 24 hours, and we can buy it at any time at our liking. So and sometimes they're open on Sundays. They're open on some on holidays. So around the clock, they make it available. So that provides a time utility. And then in terms of form, so sometimes wholesalers would buy like industrial products in bulk, or they would buy things that are in large quantities, and then they would cut or they would package them in sizes that would make it more convenient for us to buy. So a wholesaler could buy steel, or they could buy chemical, or they could buy milk or meat, in bulk, but they would package the meat or they would package the bulk in cartons and make it available and more convenient for consumers to consume, that would suit their taste. So they would transfer the bulk or the volume into shape and form that would make it more convenient and more suitable for end consumers to use and consume. So that would be a form of form utility. And then in terms of the last utility, which is information utility, retailers can provide a lot of consultative selling. They can provide a lot of information and knowledge to consumers that may be ignorant, that may be not well aware of some of the services or the features that products have. So if you go to the Apple Store, or if you go to Best Buy, these salespeople, these employees that work at these retailers are able to explain, and they're able to provide information and knowledge to consumers that have questions, that want to know more about the features and the functions of certain products. So that would be an example of information utility. So again, different types of utilities are provided by the channels. So establishing channels, broadly defined, there could be two different ways to do that, right? Direct involvement and indirect involvement. So the direct involvement would be a situation where the company would establish its own sales force or operate its own retail store. So it would be, that's why it's direct, because they don't go through intermediaries. They don't necessarily go through retailers, third-party retailers, where they compete with other products. So Apple would be a good example, right? The Apple Store, they have their own Apple Store. So or Samsung stores, right? So or they could use their own sales force to reach out to the customers. So so then there would be less conflict, right? There would be less tension, because they have complete control of how they want their sales forces to operate, and they could display the merchandise in their own retail stores. So they only sell their own products, and they don't have to worry about the competitors' products. Whereas the opposite would be indirect, right? Everything else that's not direct would be indirect. The company would utilize independent agents, distributors, wholesalers, retailers that carry not only your products but other products as well. And in such cases, things could get complex, right? So there's pros and cons of using direct, using a direct involvement type of model and indirect involvement type of model. If you use a direct, it's more costly. There's more. You got to get more involved. You got to be in touch with the customers. Whereas if you use a direct model, if you're a manufacturer, you manufacture the product and then you pass it on to the intermediaries, and your job is done, right? Everything else is taken care of by the next people down the value chain. Here we look at this slide, and the following slide shows you intermediary, length. So how many players are there, right, between the manufacturer and the end consumer? So let's first take a look at, from a consumer marketing channel perspective, and then we'll look at the industrial marketing channel perspective. So we have different levels, right? 0 level, 1 level, 2 level, 3 level. These levels represent the number of intermediaries that are situated between the manufacturer. The MFR stands for manufacturer, and the end consumer. So 0 level would be when the manufacturer sells direct to the consumer, right? Dell Direct, that would be an example. Dell computers used to sell direct to the consumers, right? There was no intermediary. They pay back. Dell, one of the unique aspects of their channel strategy was that they bypassed all the intermediaries. So consumers, they could go online or they could call and they could order their laptops or desktops directly from Dell. So that would be a classic example of 0 level. Okay, and then the next one will be 1 level, where a manufacturer would sell to the retailer. Retailer meaning Best Buys of the world, Costco's of the world, or grocery stores of the world. So they would sell to the retailer, and then the retailer would sell to the consumer. So that's 1 level, and then the third example is 2 level, where now there's 2 players in between, the wholesaler and the retailer. So a wholesaler is people who buy in bulks from the manufacturer, and then they distribute that to the retailer, okay? And then the third example is where there are 3, intermediaries. So in this example, there's a wholesaler and then another person in between a wholesaler and a retail, which is called a jobber. And then at the end, there's a consumer. So here it's more complex. So the manufacturer sells to the wholesaler, and then the wholesaler sells to a jobber, and then the jobber sells to the retailer, who in turn sells to the consumer. So, depending on, we'll look at this a little bit later, but depending on, the type of product, depending on, a lot of contextual factors, depending on how much control you want to have, you may want to use 0 levels, 1 level, 2 level, or 3 level. So obviously, one thing for sure is, as the number of intermediaries increases, the end price that the consumer will end up paying is going to eventually go up, right? Because people have to have skin in the game, and everyone has to take a cut. They have to make money. So that's why if you have 0 levels or you have fewer levels, you can pass on some of those savings to the final end consumer. In this slide, we have industrial marketing channels. So the previous was in a B2C context, and this will be an example of a B2B context. So again, we have manufacturers at the top, and then we have the industrial customer, which is another company basically, right? At the bottom, here we have 0 levels, 1 level, and 2 levels. So a 0 level would be, again, when a manufacturer sells directly to another company. A 1 level would be when a manufacturer sells to a wholesaler. WS stands for wholesaler. The wholesaler then sells to the industrial customer. And then we could have 2 different types of 2 levels, where a manufacturer could use a manufacturing sales force. MSF is that stands for manufacturing sales force, which then would sell to the wholesaler, who in turn would sell to the industrial customer. And then the last example at the very far right would be where a manufacturer would sell to the distributor or an agent, who in turn would sell to a wholesaler, who in turn would sell to an industrial customer. So again, this is to show you that, there's no right or wrong answer. Like I said, it just depends on the nature of the product, how much control you want to have, sometimes the geographical space that you have to cover. There's a lot of factors that could come in that will, influence and determine the number of players that would be situated between, the manufacturer and the end, either the consumer or the industrial customer. But like I said before, one common, factor is that the more the number of intermediaries, it's like a snowball effect, right? I mean, the price is eventually going to increase as you move along the value chain, right? As you move from the manufacturer to the next player, and so forth, until you reach the final, end consumer or the industrial customer. So the channel length, which was basically what we saw in the previous 2 slides, right? Channel length means, how many intermediaries are there between the manufacturer and the end, the end consumer or the customer. So length would increase as the following increases as geographical dispersion increases, right? That makes sense. If you're covering a wide market, like the U.S., then there's going to be more players is helpful. Whereas if it's a small country, then you don't need that many intermediaries. Or as the number of customers increases, as the number of players, the customers increases, you may need more intermediaries. And then as the number of transactions or the order increases, you may, just a few players may not be enough. You may need to have more players in the market to satisfy and accommodate the increasing number of customers and the increasing number of orders. Whereas the length may decrease as the following increases, as the product complexity increases. If the product complexity increases, then you may not want to have too many players in the market. Why? Because that's going to make things even more complex. And the length decreases as price increases. Again, if the price increases and you have more players, like I said before, that's going to increase even more price. That's going to make it even worse. That's going to exacerbate the problem. And then if perishability increases, if things go bad, and if it's not, you can't inventory it, then you don't want many players in the market. Why? Because it's going to go bad. So if perishability increases, then you need fewer players. And then again, lastly, but not least, if the need for control, if you need to control the players, the intermediaries, then if that's your goal, then you don't want a lot of intermediaries. Why? Because then, trying to control 3 players obviously is going to be more difficult than trying to control 1 player. That's just nature of the beast. So if you want to increase your controllability, right, in the channel from the manufacturer all the way down, then you probably want to have a very short, not a lengthy channel, right? Just a few players. So like I said before, it really depends on a lot of factors, right? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. You just need to sort of figure out the geographical dispersion, how many customers that you are trying to serve, the complexity of the product, the price level of your product, whether it's a perishable good or not, and whether you need control or not. Okay, working with intermediaries. So when especially when you go overseas, you need to work with intermediaries. Why? Because we may not know the local market very well, and we need to rely on intermediaries to help us sell our products. So when you select distributors, don't let the distributor select you, but you should be in charge, and you selected the distributors that you think will best represent your product. If you have a good product, typically what's been shown in over time is that the distributors may approach you and they want to carry your product, but they may have self-interest in mind. So you need to be careful and show who's in charge and you selecting the distributors as opposed to the other way around. Number 2, look for distributors that are capable of developing markets rather than those with a few good customer contacts. So in the short run, you may be tempted to select a distributor that may have a good social network, a couple of good contacts. Why? Because that's going to increase your sales. That may in the short term grow your market. But in the long run, that can go so far. So you may want a distributor that's able to grow your market, that's able to develop the market so that you can penetrate the market in the long run, as opposed to having a couple of good contacts that will, spike your sales in the short term. Number 3, treat local distributors as partners, as long-term partners, and not as simply temporary market entry, opportunistic, vehicles or means to an end, right? I mean, if like I said, at the beginning of this video, right, you need to work in hand with other companies, and distributors are the people that are going to look after you, that are going to represent you in good faith in a local market that you may be unfamiliar with. So these are really important partners, and you need to trust them, and they need to trust you, and you need to work in collaboration, right? So you need to treat these as from a not from a transactional perspective, but from a long-term partner perspective. 4, support market entry by committing money managers and proven marketing ideas. So invest in them, right? Invest resources, invest in training, invest in best practices, share your ideas, invest in facilities, invest in their human resources so that they're able to represent and look after, your needs and, your goals. From the start, maintain control over marketing strategy, right? I mean, working in partnership does not mean that you're ceding control, right? You can work in partnerships, but they know that you are the manufacturer, you own the product, and they're mainly distributing the product on your behalf. So you need to make it clear and unambiguous that you have control over the process and over the decision making. Although you're going to consult with them, but at the end of the day, the control is in your hands. Number 6, make sure distributors provide you with detailed market and financial performance data. So information sharing is important, right? It has to go both ways, right? I mean, you're in a foreign country, you're at home, you're in the home market, the distributors are selling your products on your behalf in a local market that may be 5,000 miles away. And they may have firsthand data and information because they're in closer contact with the customers, and you may not have those critical, valuable pieces of data information. So the distributors, if they use that as ammunition, as a resource to sort of as a bargaining chip, then that's not a good picture. So make sure that when you sign the contract, that the distributors are willing to share the information, the data, the valuable local market data, so that you have that data with you, so that you can use that, to improve your products, to improve your relationship with your distributors. Number 7, the last one, build links among national distributors at the earliest opportunity. So make sure that the distributors, if you're using, let's say, 10 distributors in that local market, that they're tightly knit, that they get along well, and they're not cutting, each other at the expense of the other's performance. And there's a good flow of networking going on so that they share information with one another as well. So make sure that they're not competing against each other at the expense that you are losing out, right? So you need to, take the step so that not only do you work well with the distributors, but the distributors amongst themselves get along very well as well. Okay, so this matrix shows you a global retailing market entry strategy framework. And basically, it shows you 4 cells, A, B, C, and D, and it's categorized along the dimensions of whether it's easy to enter a foreign market or difficult to enter, and whether the culture is very close to the home market or the culture is very dissimilar. It's very distinct or dissimilar. So let's look at A. So A would be an example of a chain acquisition. So the way to interpret this is, if I am trying to enter a local market through in terms of a retailing strategy, and it's a difficult to enter local market, right? So let's say it's difficult to enter, but at the same time, it's culturally it's kind of similar. Then the best strategy to use would be to acquire a chain, acquire a retail store. So I guess an example would be where when Walmart entered Japan, they acquired a stake, an equity in a retail store called Seiyu. And gradually over time, they expanded the equity stake from 6% to like over 90%. And that's how they penetrated the Japanese market. And then the next one would be B, let's say joint ventures or licensing. This would be a situation where it's difficult to enter, and it's also the culture is very dissimilar. So this would be probably the most challenging situation. So you need a JV, right? So you need help. A 50-50 joint venture or licensing can help. So in the Chinese market, I think it was before 2005, the Chinese government, when a foreign company entered the local market, it was mandatory by law that you need to have a JV, a joint venture, right? They would not allow the foreign company to operate in that local market. So you need to work with the local partner, local Chinese company, to open a retail store. So what IKEA did was, they partnered with a local store and engaged in a JV. But after 2005, they sort of relaxed this, law. So now, IKEA operates on its own. But before then, they required a JV. So that's an example of, Cell B. Cell C is a franchise, right? Franchise would be a situation where it's relatively easy to enter that local market, but culturally it's very different. So you need to rely on a franchise, a local partner, right? A franchisee who is able to, sort of follow your business model, because a franchisor is going to give that business model, the recipe, and they have to go, they have to follow that type of, that blueprint, so to speak, to operate their business. So a franchise business model is very typical. You see that often with fast food restaurants, like Pizza Hut, with Domino's Pizza, with KFC, with Starbucks. A lot of these companies, food companies, fast food companies, use this franchise model in retailing when they go overseas. Even IKEA use franchisees, in some models. And then the last one, D, is organic, right? This is like a wholly owned subsidiary where the parent company has total control and builds its own, retail store in that local market. It's a wholly owned subsidiary. So this would be when it's easy to enter and it's culturally close, right? So in such instances, they have complete control and they can operate. They can make this. They have autonomy. They can operate at their own will. So I've explained all of these, in detail in that slide. So I will skip these next slides, couple of slides that explain these 4 cells. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of examples. So Ben & Jerry, we know, a lot of you know Ben & Jerry. Ben & Jerry is a ice cream company that started out in Vermont, right, in Vermont, USA. And it's a very quirky, a very unique company culture. They're anti-corporate America. They don't like, the typical business process or how things work in a typical, big American corporate culture. So these two people, Ben and Jerry, started this company, in Vermont, and very successful in the U.S. And they wanted to expand overseas. So one of the countries that they looked into was Japan, in Asia. And they had a decision to make. How are we going to enter this Japanese market? There were already a lot of players in this market, and one of the formidable foreign brands, ice cream brands, was Haagen-Dazs. Right, Haagen-Dazs was very popular in Japan at that time, and Ben & Jerry was less known in Japan at that time. So they had a couple of options. One was they could, enter using, convenience stores. In Japan, convenience stores is everything, right? For a product like ice cream, like 7-Eleven is a classic example. For those of you that went to Japan, you probably have seen 7-Eleven, like, basically on every block. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's very easily accessible. And, so Ben & Jerry said, okay, let's then use a, convenience store, an outlet where, it's very accessible. People visit, 7-Eleven, Japanese visit 7-Eleven on a very, frequent basis. So let's use 7-Eleven. Another one was, well, let's license this product, or, let's use a distributor that's already, in Japan that, we can utilize because they may have local knowledge about, consumers, about branding, about pricing, about distribution. So let's rely on a distributor to distribute this product into grocery stores and so forth. Or another option that they had was, well, let's, open up a wholly owned subsidiary like organic. Let's open up a, single scoop shop that they have in the U.S. So it's just a Ben & Jerry's ice cream store, standalone store. So they were contemplating, several different options. And at the end of the day, they chose to go with the 7-Eleven convenience store option, right? So they ended up selling their, ice creams in, the widely, popular 7-Eleven. So this just goes to show you that, they have, when you're trying to, go into a retail, store in a foreign market, Companies have many different options to choose from, and it just depends on what fits best with their marketing strategy and what they want to achieve in that local market. Another example is steel. I'll be using this example, not only here but more in the future. But steel is a chainsaw company. It's the biggest and it's the most well known and high quality chainsaw company in the world. It's a German company. It has a big presence in the U.S. And Steel also had many different options to choose from when it was deciding on which channel to use to distribute their fine chainsaws. They could have sold it in big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, or they could have sold it directly from their website. Bypassing all their intermediaries, or they could have sold it through distributors. But what they ended up doing was they sold it through their exclusive dealers, their dealers. So if you go to Steel's website, you cannot buy steel directly from this manufacturing company, Steel. They don't sell it directly to customers. They go out of their way to push you to visit one of their dealers. So if you type in your zip code, they'll show you the nearest dealers that are located closest to you, and they encourage you to go, check it out at a closest dealer. So they have a very good relationship with their dealers, and best the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. They tried to approach Steel many times before. Because they want to sell these products in their stores, but Steel said, no, we're not gonna sell our high quality products in these big box stores, but we're gonna sell them using our dealers. Because why? Because dealers provide Steel products. They provide consultative selling. They're able to provide expert knowledge. They're able to provide excellent service where these big box stores are not able to provide. So in order to maintain their high quality product, they believe that the dealer distribution channel was the most fitting one, was the most appropriate channel to use. Vertical integration. So this last concept is about how a company may vertical integrate either downstream, which is forward integration, or upstream, which is backward integration. So let's say that A is the manufacturer, C on the left is a supplier, a raw material supplier, and then B is the retailer, right? So vertical integration means, do I want to integrate and have total control of, different intermediaries, either downstream or upstream? So if I want to control and integrate a retailer, let's say, so that they can best represent my product, then I would engage in forward integration. That would be like downstream. Because then it's my company. I can do what I want to do. They'll look after my product. They will best represent so Apple Store is a classic example, right? So Apple's the manufacturer, Apple Store is the retailer. So, they vertically integrated into the retailing context. So now, you can only find Apple, laptops or phones in an Apple store. Same thing with C. If you integrate upstream, which is backward integration, then you're owning the parts suppliers, right? These are the raw material suppliers. So if you, own the chips, if you own the battery, if you own, the raw materials, the ingredients, the parts that go into, assembling, an iPhone, then that would be an example of a backward integration or an upstream integration. So, depending on what your goal is, you can engage in forward or backward. And there's pros and cons, right? The classical pro would be you have more control. But the disadvantage, the drawback would be you may be, entering into a business that you may be unfamiliar with, right? If you're a manufacturer, you don't want to be. Some of you may not want to be you don't want to engage in raw material a business. You don't want to engage in a retailing business where you have direct contact with the customers. If you just want to focus on manufacturing, that's all you want to do, and that's where your core competency is. Then you may not want to engage in forward integration or backward integration. But if you do, it does give you more control. So again, there's a pros and cons, and you just need to sort of balance it out and figure out which one fits your overall channel and distribution strategy.